and she'll be heard in silence.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, today I asked the question of the Minister all about STEM training and why it's so important to the people of Western Sydney. Minister, Western Sydney has before it an innovation revolution. The innovation revolution stems from many different facets, all really coming back to this federal government. We have an innovation corridor which in many ways has been spearheaded by some very good friends of ours, the Vice-Chancellor of the University of Western Sydney, Barney Glover, and of course the Chancellor, Peter Sheargold. When we look at the innovation corridor, it goes from Campbelltown in the south, through Penrith and then out to the northwest sector. Over the next 10 years, 1 million people will move into this region. This region has been earmarked, and Penrith in particular, to be a focal point of health and education. Already, with the $3.6 billion worth of federal infrastructure that's coming into this region in just supporting the roads packages, we're seeing science parks coming before the New South Wales Department of Planning. One in particular, Minister, is the Sydney Science Park. It's owned by the E.J. Cooper Group, the Beata Group. They see their 280 hectares to be 12,200 jobs smart jobs in biotech. They also see an additional 10,000 research positions that they would like to see come into this facility. The next one that I'd like to talk to you about is Sydney IQ. Now, this sits on UWS land at Werrington. UWS sees there an additional 6,000 jobs, once again in biotech, engineering, smart manufacturing, and the technology and engineering that could go in there. With so much support from the federal government and moral support, they have created a business incubator and working with partners like Google, looking at how they can create the new businesses, a new Google, but an Australian new Google. Yeah. Now, my electorate, Minister, is also the 10th youngest electorate in the Federation. You know, I want to see these smart business parks come in, but I want to see it's the children of Western Sydney that will be the best and brightest. I want to make sure that we provide STEM training to these children, that they will grow through their education from their primary school all the way through to university. That is the children of Western Sydney that will be filling the jobs at the Sydney Science Park, that will be at the jobs of the Sydney IQ. Talking with my local principals, and I've been holding forums with all of my local principals, be it the Catholic principals, the primary schools, high schools, public schools, independent schools. They are so excited about the future for our region. They are excited about the innovation revolution. They want to get on board. They want to get on board and look at STEM training. Now, when talking to the principals, overwhelmingly, a lot of my school teachers, like myself, hold university degrees from the University of Western Sydney. It's a major university for providing teacher training at the university level. So working with the University of Western Sydney and with partners like Google, what we're going to do is we're going to hold professional development days for the teachers that are already on class. We want to make sure that we get this STEM training all the way through. Now, when we look at those opposite and their track record here, they come up with a ludicrous idea, which had no ability of funding and could even get the funding model right. Now, talking to Professor Barney Glover about this, his thoughts were, and I quote him in the Sydney Morning Herald on the 31st of May this year, he said, "I'm not sure there's any evidence to support it. But what we do need is a more serious debate about to know what it would be to deliver a greater participation in the STEM disciplines." This is really important for my region, Minister. Now, the other thing I did want to point out was a comment even from UWS, that the University of Western Sydney is committed to supporting STEM uptake across Western Sydney through initiatives like the Sydney Science Centre. Now, this is a wonderful initiative that the University of Western Sydney is always also looking at. They're wanting a science centre where children can come and participate in science and really get up close and personal with STEM, because they want to see this innovation revolution take hold. They don't want to just see federal government investment in infrastructure. They want to see jobs for the future, jobs for our children. We don't know what jobs will necessarily be there for children in 10, 20, 30 years' time. We want to make sure that our children are creating it. So, Minister, can you please explain to me what the government is doing to help all of these schools, to help school education in science, technology, engineering and mathematics, and the subjects with the aim of supporting the jobs for the future?
Thank you very much, Member for Lindsay. And I might add that Barney Glover was actually the Vice-Chancellor of the Charles Darwin University before he went to, he moved away, sadly. So, well, there you go. So he gets around. He gets around spreading the love,
Everybody loves Barney.
That's right, we do.
Deputy Speaker.
And we should send him this Hansard.
The question is that the proposed expenditure be agreed to. Call the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm very pleased to get the question from the member for Lindsay, who is the best member for Lindsay yet elected, and is doing a fantastic job, and I must say has a fantastic relationship with the University of Western Sydney through Barney Glover, but also has focused on jobs in Western Sydney and the transformative impact of higher education to Western Sydney and to the people of Western Sydney. And the University of Western Sydney is a great driver of economic growth in Western Sydney, and the chance to give young people particularly, but also mature age students who want to re-skill, the opportunity to change their skills in Western Sydney. I've been to the University of Western Sydney several times, opened their university college in fact, and they are at the cutting edge. They're going to be one of our very best universities and are well on the way to achieving that status, and are not very old in the process of doing so. So I do congratulate the member for Lindsay for jumping right into higher education, training, STEM and the University of Western Sydney, and supporting that particular institution. It'll have real benefits, both economically and socially, because of course in Western Sydney it is a very multicultural part of Australia. And by mixing together at the University of Western Sydney, by being in the same classes together, by breaking down barriers, whether they are cultural or religious barriers, the University of Western Sydney is playing its part in the inclusion, cohesion and harmony of Australian society. So the benefits in the budget for the University of Western Sydney in STEM are quite clearly that our higher education reforms will be a massive bonus for universities like UWS, because they specialise in giving low SES or disadvantaged students a pathway into higher education. And as part of our higher education reforms, we are going to expand the demand-driven system for undergraduate degrees to sub-bachelor degrees, to diplomas and associate degrees that are offered by universities and TAFEs and other non-university education providers in those pathways programs that many students in Western Sydney use to get the opportunity to go to undergraduate, to get an undergraduate degree. So our higher education reforms are actually a social justice policy. They allow students who wouldn't otherwise have the chance to access a pathways program to access that program, to be able to use the higher education contribution scheme to access it and to then go on to university. And the Kemp-Norton report, which I initiated not long after becoming the Minister for Education, found that students that did a pathways program had a 1% dropout rate at university in undergraduate degree. Students that didn't have a pathways program but from a similar demographic background had a 24% dropout rate. So our higher education reforms would have been a great boon for the University of Western Sydney, and they will be when they are finally passed by this parliament, because they'll be able to expand their pathways programs, which is why Barney Glover is so enthusiastic about my reforms, and why, as the new head of UA, he is publicly and strongly supporting them. But they'd also be able to access the Australian scholarships and the HEP scholarships that the government plans to introduce. The scholarships that the university would offer, which they would use, I assume, to support disadvantaged students, because the University of Sydney Vice-Chancellor has said that if the government's reforms pass, he'll be able to increase his scholarships from the University of Sydney from 600 to 9,000. 9,000 scholarships, and he'll be able to change his demographic breakdown from 6% of the University of Sydney's students being from low SES background to 20% of the students at University of Sydney being from low SES background. It is great news, and it shocks me and surprises me that Labor has so lost their way that they would be opposing what is clearly a good policy for low SES students. And through our HEP scholarships, Member for Lindsay, through our HEP scholarships, we'll be able to focus those on low SES and disadvantaged students and mature age students wanting to be re-skilled. So the University of Western Sydney will win again because they educate a higher percentage of low SES students than many other universities because of where they find themselves. I haven't had the opportunity to talk about STEM in schools because higher education is such a passion for me, but I look forward to the opportunity to do so before 5:30.
Thank you very much, Minister.